So the ocean is a very unforgiving body of water, and it will swallow you up with no remorse. So last Thursday, in Englewood, Florida, my hometown, a diver was lost offshore. He spent about 6 hours in the water before the Coast Guard was able to rescue him. The Coast Guard was called. They arrived with support boats from Charlotte County Sheriff's Department and Sarasota County acting as backup. I feel like there's some definite lessons to be learned from this whole scenario of this diver being lost. Keep in mind, my goal here is not to drag anybody through the mud. It's not to dive shame anyone. It's not to say I told you so or make anything out of it more than what it is, which is a lesson that everyone needs to hear if they're going to be diving off of a boat without an anchor. So let's back up to Wednesday. 3 friends go offshore on a fishing trip. From what it sounds like, they were 6 miles offshore, which isn't that big of a deal. Wednesday was a pretty bumpy day. The wind was blowing, the current was ripping. I seem to recall on Wavefinder was somewhere around 2-foot seas or something like that, which is pretty choppy. 3 friends, they go out fishing, they throw their anchor. It gets caught on a reef or a ledge or whatever structure that they might have been fishing, and they can't get the anchor to break free. All you can do is cut the line and head back in. I've done it a dozen times. I've been on reefs and wrecks to where the wind has just blown me into the wreck. I cannot get my anchor loose and I have to cut it. I've lost several anchors and I've been able to retrieve several anchors, but that's just part of the game of reef fishing. Is there's always a chance that you're going to get hung up to where you can't get loose. The boat owner cuts the line and goes back in for the night. The plan is to go back the next day, retrieve the anchor with his scuba gear. He grabs a couple of buddies, all of them pile in his boat. It sounds to me like there was 2 other people in the boat, so they head out to the spot. He's using a GPS bottom machine. That's what you pretty much have to be able to find these spots. And I do know on Thursday the weather and the waves were even more rough than they were on Wednesday because it's gradually getting worse as the weekend comes in. So actually today I believe it's like 7 or 8 foot seas. So this guy seemed like a fairly experienced, confident diver, enough to where he was ready to drop down into 40 to 45 feet to retrieve his anchor on his own. They pull up on the spot, he gets his gear on, and he rolls onto the spot and goes down to retrieve his lost anchor. And it sounds to me like that's where everything just took a dive downhill. Unless this guy has a second anchor to throw out to hold him on his spot, obviously the boat is going to drift as soon as they stop the motor. When you have a diver down in the water with no anchor or no way to hold the boat, whoever is on the boat is topside support. Someone in that boat has to have a common knowledge of how a boat works, how to drive the boat, how to throttle the boat, and how to read the bottom machine that is on the boat. So in this case, the owner of the boat is the diver. So it's his responsibility to make sure that the people that are with him, that are the topside support, know the basics on how to drive his boat and how to read his bottom machine. And also, it's his job to make sure that the people are being aware of where his bubbles are. Now, that's a iffy thing to me because we have been offshore in some rough seas and we've had divers down and you can't see bubbles because of the waves, how tall everything is, and how the wind's blowing and the waves. So bubble watching is a little bit of a suspect thing depending on the water conditions. So I know these water conditions were not that favorable for bubble watching. One thing that we always do when we're diving without an anchor, we always drop a marker buoy. It can be any kind of line with a weight on it, some kind of a float that when you drop it down on the spot, and then you can always see that spot in the water and you don't have to depend on your bottom machine. Fishermen use it, Divers use it. It's something to mark the spot that you're diving or fishing. So it sounds to me like none of that happened. And the two people that were topside had no idea how to drive the boat. They had no idea how to look at their GPS. They weren't paying much attention to bubbles. And there was no marker buoy dropped. And a boat can drift off at a really high rate of speed and you not realize. So it's, if I remember right, what I read, 2 hours passed and the people in the boat are noticing that their diver's not surfacing. Obviously, there's a little bit of a concern and panic. So they call the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard deploys a helicopter, a rescue boat. Sarasota County Sheriff's Department has a backup boat looking, and so does the Charlotte County Sheriff's Department. Everyone's out looking for the boat. Everyone's out looking for the diver. The boat gets located somewhere, I believe, somewhere between 6 and 8 miles offshore, drifting. From what I understand, he surfaces after only being down for 10 or 15 minutes, looks out in the distance. The boat is a mile away or better, too far away for him to yell and for them to hear him. And if no one knows how to drive the boat, then it doesn't matter anyway. So he turns, he's probably got a sense of where shore is, so he fills up his BC. So at that point, it's a life jacket and starts kicking to shore. The diver gets located 3 miles offshore. He gets reunited with his boat and the 2 other friends on the boat, and they're escorted back to shore by a Charlotte County Sheriff's Department. Everything's fine. Everybody's good. A happy ending to what could have been a tragic story. Because if you think about it, if this diver was actually in the water for 6 hours, that ocean water right now is only somewhere around 65 to 70 degrees or less, depending. But I know it's somewhere in that temperature because I was just out there last week. For him to be in that water for 6 hours, that's a long time at that temperature, even with a wetsuit. If you like this commentary content, give me a follow. There's more to come. Until then, have a good week. Cheers. We'll see you.